many of you now or can remember back to your university days that one class can be the best experience of your life or perhaps one of the worst. But what if the students were in charge of the experience? Emily Withrow dares to teach with that concept. Listen to her discuss when students write the syllabus. Sounds scary.
June 16th, 2012. I am 37 weeks pregnant, and I'm having contractions about every 5 minutes. So I do what any rational woman in my position would do, and I convinced my husband we should probably go see a movie. This is the only thing, by the way, of all of the representation of childbirth that you see in pop culture, the only thing that is true is that if you are a woman in labor, people will do what you say. So we went to go see Moonrise Kingdom, which is this wonderful Wes Anderson film about the nature of young love. And there's this wonderful opening sequence. It's atmospheric. This family is trapped indoors because of bad weather during the summer, and the children are gathered around a record player listening to music. They're listening to The Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra by Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic. If we can get a sample of it, maybe. So, just to give you some context, this piece was originally put together by Benjamin Britten, and it was designed to expose young people to great music and to pick apart its complexity. Now, Leonard Bernstein then picked it up in the 1960s with a show on CBS. So, I'm sitting in the theater, and I will admit I was in an emotionally interesting place, but I was really struck by this piece of music, and not just the theme of Henry Purcell's original piece, but this effort by Leonard Bernstein. As an educator and one who has this drive to awake a passion for journalism in young people, I felt a great affinity with Bernstein when I was sitting there. It's this desire to take something that we love, that's so complex, and to distill it into its essence as a means of introduction. Now, Bernstein, I believe, had a little bit simpler of a goal, because he was working toward appreciation as opposed to creation. And really, at Medill, we try to do both. But I couldn't let this composition go. I kept thinking about how the structure of music is similar to how a complex piece of journalism comes together. You have moments when the full orchestra plays together, and then you have moments where individual instruments carry the melody alone. I started seeing similarities between the way this music was put together and Henry Gantt's famous chart on project management. This is where things turn really nerdy really quickly. So I started thinking about how I could employ a similar strategy in the classroom, how I could capture the spirit of this piece of music and put it into practice, because I wanted to put together a class that made a big, interactive, multimedia project designed across platforms. And I wanted the students to spend an entire quarter reporting out a single story. They would need editorial direction, design direction, project management skills, technical chops, multimedia prowess. So could I create for my students a more realistically complex representation of real-world projects? Could I take this orchestral model that takes the progression and assembly of so many moving parts and recreate that in the classroom? I decided yes, yes, I could do this, but that the classroom couldn't be a classroom, not really. For this to work, I'd have to move away from this lockstep model that we work with currently, where all of our students show up in the same place at the same time in the same room and take the same set of tests, hearing the same information toward the same common goal. This traditional method of teaching is efficient, but I believe it's ultimately flawed. It lacks what we need to tackle the full complexity of a difficult, complex project, and it ignores a basic truth about our students. They are all different. They are different instruments. They come to us with different levels of skill, interest, and aptitude and experience. So why create a one-size-fits-all syllabus? Systemic to this problem is the fallacy of having to teach to the lowest common denominator. If you're trying to reach everyone all at once, you have to pick a target level of difficulty, right? Now, related to this is the problem that we have in journalism education of trying to tackle scope versus depth. Journalism today is the collaboration of many moving parts, and it is more or less impossible for us to create a complex, interactive, multimedia project in which all of the students are doing all of the things at the same level and learning everything all at once. It's unrealistic. So we either have to say, we choose scope, and we do a great variety of things at a shallow level, or we choose a couple of things and we do those 2 things, 3 things in depth, right? The problem is, with this type of project, the quality really suffers if you're having to choose scope or depth. So those are the 2 things I found myself wrestling with when I came back from maternity leave. I had the baby, by the way. And so it was the scope versus depth problem, and this desire, really the desire to reach everyone all at once, the fear of having to teach to any common denominator in a class that really requires lots of different things. So I looked for help. I approached my former colleague, Jeremy Gilbert, about collaborating, and I sat down in his office and I said, okay, Jeremy, I have this idea about basing a class structure on a piece of music. And to Jeremy's credit, he did not chalk this up to sleep deprivation. He took me seriously, and together we sketched the first version of what would become the unclass. You can go forward one to the, there we go. So instead of creating one path through the class, we envisioned 7 different channels in which our students could jump in and out of. If it helps to stick with the orchestra theme, we can think of those as different sections of instruments. So those channels were populated by workshops. Some were standalone, single subject, sort of one-off things. Others had a progression of events through them. Some were pop-up. If the students defined a need that we hadn't anticipated, then we would offer a pop-up workshop on that subject. And the workshops were designed to appear at the moment that they became relevant to the students. So at the moment that the students needed to be choosing a typeface for their design, we would offer a typography workshop, for example. And so our schedule looked to me like the fusion of a piece of music and this Gantt's chart on project management, with all the students coming together and then sort of playing different roles at different times. So the students used these workshops to create individual learning plans in the classroom. So they each filled out a dance card, is what we called them, and they created their own path through the class. Each workshop had homework associated with it before and after, largely applied to the project that they were working on. So this went a long way to solve the problem of having to teach at everyone all at once, because we weren't teaching to everyone all at once. We were teaching to little subsections of the class at any given time. So students who were experienced in one particular area were able to opt out entirely. Students who were interested or wanted a review could opt into those workshops. And the spirit of the class was substantially different from most of the other classes I have taught. The students were in charge of the flow of the class, how it was going to work, and every student signed up for the maximum number of workshops possible, which was really cool. They were working in teams of 4. We didn't sign off on their dance cards. Their teammates did. And so the students had to be strategic about how, you would attend type and I would go to HTML, and then we would come back and share what we learned. And so we noticed that a lot of peer-to-peer learning was happening as well. So students would go to the workshops and come and bring that knowledge back to their group. And this built a better community within the class as a whole. We saw a lot of coordination going on between groups as well. As far as scope versus depth go, we were able to address that problem by offering both simultaneously. So we had, again, progressions within the different channels, and then we were able also to offer both beginner and advanced versions of the same subject at the same time. Some workshops were required for everyone, so those great big orchestral editorial moments where everyone works together, and then at other moments people were off doing their own thing. So we think the model has been successful because it syncs well with what we know about motivation theory. So it powerfully employs choice, autonomy, and relevance by breaking up the linear structure of the classroom. Now, not everything went spectacularly well, I will tell you. In the beginning, the students were very uncomfortable with the ambiguity of the class. So a little ill at ease with this idea that they would create their own syllabus. Because after all, if it's up to you to create the syllabus, it's up to you to determine how valuable and how successful that class is going to be. Ultimately, though, the students were motivated. They were empowered. They created phenomenal final projects for the most part. The unclass gave them the skills they needed at the level they needed at the moment they needed them to effectively collaborate on a complex modern journalism project. So to tie back to the theme of the evening, big ideas can come from very strange places. This one in particular started with an afternoon matinee, a piece of music, and a very small idea born the same day as my son. Thanks.